Welcome everyone. It's Q&A at 6 o'clock with Father Dave. Father Dave, so we've got a lot going on in the news with the Catholic Church lately.
Yeah.
There was articles over the weekend about the Catholic Church received $1.4 billion in aid from the federal stimulus plan to, for coronavirus.
Payroll protection,
Yep. So what's going on with that?
Yeah. Okay. And that's a huge amount of money. Huge amount of money. So it was the payroll protection plan, and any small business under a certain level of income and less, I think, or under 500 or 500 fewer employees could apply for help to cover their payroll during this COVID pandemic crisis. And most Catholic churches, I would guess many, if not most, maybe I'd say probably most Catholic churches did apply, as well as the diocese as a central institution. And we applied like anyone else did, any other small business, and went through a local bank or credit union, and they had the normal forms. And the federal program made it clear that it was not to distinguish between those who are religion-based or not religion-based. It had to do with trying to keep as many people employed as could be during this time. There was going to be so many layoffs and so much unemployment and so much strain on the unemployment system, and then a tremendous loss of income. So we applied, and as did most Catholic parishes and dioceses, and as far as I know, most of them that applied, if not all, did get some monies. Has there been some kickback? Yeah, saying, well, why isn't that a violation of the separation of church and state? And I think the separation of church and state has long been a contentious point of debate amongst constitutional scholars, and there's been different key landmark rulings from the Supreme Court over the centuries, but it comes down to that separation. There are some who want it to be almost like a wall, and that was Thomas Jefferson's point of view. Others kind of it's a line of separation, and so the federal government is not to intrude onto religious matters, but in turn, you cannot have a favoritism given to any particular religion or mechanisms that are showing favoritism. So it comes down to, was this a way to either intrude into the inner operation of churches and other religious institutions? The answer is no, because we were treated no differently than any other small business. It was on the business end of things, and had to do with how many employees you had, and what is your payroll, and are you going to keep them on, and so forth. And then the other side is, is it a way to kind of establish a religious institution contrary to kind of that constitutional line? And again, it doesn't do that at all. It doesn't make any religious institution front and center or more important. So basically, and I think the recent Supreme Court rulings on other issues sort of are in those same kind of lines. It's a perfectly legitimate way to help society as a whole, because people need jobs. Jobs pay taxes. People with jobs are able to take care of their families. People with jobs are able to reach out and help other people more. People with jobs are able to help so many aspects of ourselves as a society and culture, and has nothing to do specifically with a particular religious view or promoting a religious view. So I was very thankful here so I'm going to tie it into St. Regis, because when we went into that lockdown moment, income did decline. There was worry about the school, and should we lay off some of the teachers, and how many, or who should we lay off? On the overall church staff side, would show also a question of how many of those employees, because if you can't do all your work from home, which is very hard to do as a church, do all your work from home, well, then maybe we should put them onto the unemployment system and let the unemployment system help them. And so we were very thankful because by receiving that, we were able to keep everyone on payroll. We paid them their normal salaries. We were able not to put anyone onto unemployment, and we're able to do that in a way that doesn't harm us in terms of being able to not just do it for a couple months, but to do it in an ongoing, to continue to have an ongoing business, i.e. church, but ongoing employment of people. So it was really very helpful to us. Just if you're tuning in, you're from St. Regis Parish, I did say that wrote in my column once, but the amount that we applied for is you gave the Small Business Administration your payroll monthly payroll times 2.5. So 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And that was the maximum. That was the amount that they could then you could receive money up to. Now, in return, if we used it to pay for salaries and utilities, a certain percentage, and some people who have mortgages, we don't, could use it for some mortgage payments, then you can have that. You can apply to have that loan become a grant. That's across the board. So we are in the process of finishing. Using the money so that the next step would be then to apply to the Small Business Administration through our bank to see if we can turn that into a grant rather than a loan. And that would be very helpful, obviously, because you won't have to pay the interest or the loan back. So it was we received about $400,000, just over $400,000. Probably will not, we'll have to, given the rules, it might not be all redeemable as a grant, but a significant amount will be, and again, it allowed us not to lay off anybody on the parish, the school, and so that was a very beneficial thing for us.
Okay, thank you, Father. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. You've been asking for now moral questions.
Yeah, I like moral questions.
So we've been experiencing in this culture it's called the cancel culture, but it's this idea of going back and kind of, it's the removing of statues. Okay. It's the public display of things that we are now contesting their history. So how as Christians do we look upon this? I mean, it's being taken to its extreme of like Abraham Lincoln, statues of Abraham Lincoln being taken down. Father, how do we discern how should we as Christians approach this particular moment in our history?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it myself because I mean I don't think it helps the younger generation and then future generations to simply lose all the cultural focal points. Yeah. I mean, personally, so personally, I wish that we weren't so quick to just simply say, tear that down, because I think you could keep a number of them, and however you do the education surrounding them or the plaque that's with them, you can contextualize it in a way that can bring out some of the negative cultural reality that we inherited from people. I mean, it'd be very important, that which presidents owned slaves. It'd be very important that people are taught that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with learning that. But then if you don't have any focus for that, then it could just kind of get faded into oblivion. And all you do is focus on here and now, and we don't learn from history. We don't gain from history. And there's also, in most cases, there are the ones that have been raised up are usually people that you can learn some positive things from as well. So that's the one. So that's the initial. But with that comes the question, and I'll get to how to approach it from a moral point of view. Is I heard, because I've been listening to both sides, and so how much energy was spent over the last 150 years, 200 years for cultural iconic focus on people who were slaves, people, native, indigenous peoples, and there's some, but there is a certain way in which a lot of cultural icons are connected to a cultural view that is fairly limited. It's fairly limited. You know, it's not the most broad necessarily cultural view, and so I think we have to hear that when people, I mean, I think not everyone, most people, that initial thing where people just kind of tear down statues. Well, okay, yeah, right. Do you even know what that person did or whatever? I don't. But so to me, that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. But I do think we have to hear beneath that some more considered views, which are suggesting, and I think that there's some truth to it, that when you use the term cancel culture, you can also hide behind it in a way that says that we don't have to change society significantly and look at all the injustices that have happened in society, that power structures have happened in society. So, for example, racism is a reality. And racism, I don't mean a prejudice, I don't mean bias, I don't mean a personal attitude of anybody. There are people who are very biased and prejudiced and angry at races. And that can come from any human being. When I say racism, it's a structural, it's an ism, it's a structured reality where our experience of culture and economics and so forth is structured in such a way that by and large, people who are black are at a disadvantage than someone who is not black. And so we have to understand that there are injustices structured into society that are clearly ways in which we can improve, and we have to, I think, be committed to improving. So the church, the good news from the church's point of view, I think, is the Catholic Church has what we call Catholic social teaching, which I've talked about before, and I think it's a marvelous framework for thinking through these issues, rather than just a knee-jerk reaction, just an emotional reaction, just an opinion on one side versus another. The church invites us to go to some key principles and then think those through. And one of the key principles, of course, is human dignity. And so one of the guiding principles is, are there any cultural icons that are really, in a sense, demeaning human dignity? And so if there's some, for example, and this has happened, some cities, especially in the South, where a statue was erected in a predominantly black area of the city that to reference back to the Confederacy, that is a demeaning of human dignity. I have no problem with that statue getting out of there. On the other hand, if there's a way in which it's not, that it might be enhancing human dignity. I'm thinking, like, if you ever gone to the Jefferson Memorial in Washington D.C., I can't speak for everything that's there, but my memory of it is that I came out of that more enhanced, committed to human dignity than against it, right? So that might need some qualifications or something, but I would think that it'd be a shame to say that that's on the same level as another kind of a statue that might be trying to deliberately demean human dignity. So human dignity, the common good. Common good has to be, do we have enough on all levels, economic, cultural, political, that people have the basic needs met so they can participate and have their human dignity, they can live out their human dignity. And so I do think culture is huge there. And I think to lose historical culture is a tremendous loss to the common good of everybody, because it's amazing how, and we know this as Christians, because every Sunday we go back to the scriptures, right? You know, thousands of years old scripture, but it becomes fresh and anew because we bounce our current experience off against that, the text and the words of the scriptures, opening ourselves up to God's Spirit, and so by having that cultural icon, of course we view it in faith, right? But having that cultural icon, it's ever fresh, it's ever new, and it can challenge a next generation, a new generation. To lose that and to say, well, you know, all that is somehow to be put aside because it was in a patriarchal culture, it was in a culture that didn't appreciate certain aspects of human life. And there are some truths. I mean, it was a patriarchal culture, but to lose that would to lose a rich source of change and transformation. Doesn't mean that we can't be critical of the context, but we have to I think we have a sense of the common good We want people to have cultural heritages that can both be challenged when necessary, but can challenge us to do the best we can. So those two. And then the church says solidarity. The church has the principle of solidarity. And solidarity, this is, I think, the key principle in this particular discussion, because solidarity isn't just like, hey, I'm on your side, Chris, I'm on your side. Solidarity is as a principle, is to recognize the divide that's there in different people, different viewpoint, different ways of life, and deliberately approach that divide in a solidarity way. How can I bridge that divide in a way that can keep my human dignity, keep your human dignity, and help the common good? So that forces, if you live by that principle, it forces me to not just do what's called cancel culture. I need to understand your viewpoint. But vice versa, I can't just use the term cancel culture and it's over and done, the argument's done. No, you have to learn my viewpoint. You have to walk in my shoes. I have to try to walk in your shoes. It calls for dialogue. It calls for learning from one another. It calls for appreciating that I might not, certain humility, I might not have some insights that I need to hear from, and the only way I can hear from is to hear from someone who's very different than me. And so that principle of solidarity to support the common good and human dignity is a key Catholic social teaching principle that if people really embraced it, instead of just knee-jerk reactions or just anger or just dismissive cancel culture comments, I think we would be creating communities of dialogue. We'd be trying to understand each other's history and viewpoints, and we could, I think, come to points of view which would say, Chris, I totally disagree with you on that. I hear where you're coming from. Here are my concerns, but I disagree with that. And then from that, you might then have a basis to make some judgments, practical judgments. Well, what about this cultural icon or this moment? Should that be adjusted rather than just kind of blanketly one way or the other? So I think the key principle is solidarity.
Okay, so if I can put you on the spot, one that's been kind of contentious has been more secular is statues of Christopher Columbus. So taking those principles, how would you apply to, and I'll give you the specific situation.
You're talking about Columbus, Ohio?
Columbus, Ohio is removing the statue of Christopher Columbus.
Well, again, I'm going to invoke then another principle. Another principle of Catholic social teaching is subsidiarity, which says the decision belongs to those most affected by that decision. So a statue in Columbus, Ohio is to be decided amongst the citizens of Columbus, Ohio. The mayor and the council of Columbus, Ohio would be the delegated decision makers probably at that point. Citizens can chime in. Hopefully they have town council type of open-ended forums. People could maybe make petitions to change that viewpoint and so forth. So the subsidiarity, you say that belongs there. Another place, it might be the state level has to decide. Another place, it might be the national level. But having said that, that thing of so I wouldn't say there's no all or nothing there. Again, I think you have to say what is the role that statue plays, right? What's the role that statue plays in the culture of that particular community, and how has it been used, and can it be? Is it something that can be redeemed in the sense of, because we believe in redemption, can it be redeemed, can be used in a way that can enhance the common good and the dignity of people? Or has it gotten so tainted that all it's seen is it's a symbol of hate, a symbol of division, and so forth? Now, I mean, again, I'm open to learning. For me, I know Christopher Columbus's background. I know that he is not someone to be raised up as kind of like the model Christian of all times. But I think there's enough history between us and Columbus that we can hopefully both kind of honor what he was, or respect what he was trying to do, but also point out all the ways in which he made huge mistakes in terms of how he viewed the indigenous peoples and treated them and so forth. I know our Knights of Columbus. Catholics have Knights of Columbus. They're kind of gung ho on making sure that Columbus gets protected. Yeah. And again, that's fine. But I think we have to be. I think there it's just a matter of, again, promoting if you have a viewpoint of an understanding and history about Columbus that you want to share with the world, please do, because that can help the world see not just a negative light of Christopher Columbus, but a positive light on Christopher Columbus. But Solidarity then says, but also let's hear people who feel kind of defamed, not defamed, but demeaned by that. In that particular debate, I haven't heard that many people say they feel demeaned by Christopher Columbus, other than in that generic sense that we recognize the tremendous horrors that we perpetrated on indigenous people in the Americas. By we, I mean I'm a European. You know, if I go back to my ancestors, they're all European. So that movement of peoples was devastating for indigenous peoples, and we have not really come up to accept that just yet completely. We really haven't. In fact, another Supreme Court case, and this is totally off the subject in some ways, but interesting, was they ruled in favor of the Indian tribe that of the eastern half of Oklahoma, and they said that treaty from whenever it was, I forget, early 1900s maybe, is still in effect. And so that tribe, that reservation now has legitimate claim to the entire eastern half of Oklahoma, including where Tulsa, Oklahoma is. So that's caused all sorts. So it's going to go back to court, and they're going to work out these. There's going to be a kind of a negotiated retreaty, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen. But it's very fascinating that even the Supreme Court thought that there's a legitimacy there. So anyway, my point being that I think those kinds of things have to be handled per case, per situation. Both sides have to try to hear the other person's best arguments, heartfelt arguments. Try to find ways that you can bridge the gap if possible. And in the end, can there be a way in which we can maintain these cultural focal points that both respects human dignity, helps the common good, but also helps people recognize the ways in which we can improve and change and get better at living our human life. I mean, the church has those as well, right? I mean, Junipero Serra in California, there's a statue of him that was pulled down because of how he established the missions in California and created not a plantation system, but some people accuse him of treating the people with condescension and making them get locked into living right there at the mission centers and so forth, rather than really empowering them to take over the land and so forth. So the Catholic Church gets faced with this on not just in America, but across the world as well, because quite often the faith got spread by a Western civilization that wasn't just spreading Christianity, it was spreading a whole culture with that. And so the church, I think, is in the middle of all that. And by and large, my experience of missionaries is they've sorted some of that out pretty well. In other words, we have an extraordinary history of missionaries over the centuries, but especially in the last 100 years or so, who truly have separated out the kind of what you might call the cultural baggage of, like a Belgian priest or sister establishing schools in Africa. Well, they weren't there to promote the Belgian civilization. They truly wanted the local indigenous population to know the good news of Jesus, but also to have the human dignity and come into their own. And so there's a huge history of things that went wrong, but there's also a huge history of amazing things that those missionaries have done.
If I can add another kind of example, but this has been in the blogosphere, the use of European or white statues of Jesus and Mary.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we go about? I mean,
again,
to the point where some people are even attacking churches.
And to me, that's a knee-jerk reaction. It's sad. Violence is never the answer. Violence is not one of the principles of Catholic Association. Is not if all else fails, use violence. That's not a principle. We have a peace principle because Jesus was very much involved with nonviolence. So that's never the answer. But again, and I think there can be some legitimacy if it's used, if those symbols are used, and they were in the past. There are people who have memories of growing up African American in parishes where they were shown a statue of a white Jesus and saying, you can't model him, you can't, and we're not that far away when men, Catholic men, who were African American, were not allowed to become priests. And so we're not that far away. It's not like we've had this great history of I think we're better. I mean, we're much better now. I think we've learned a lot. But so we have to recognize there can be a use of those kinds of things that are truly hurtful and negative. Again, per case basis. But I do want to point out I think if you want to call it genius of the Catholic Church is it has tried to enculturate itself in every area of the world. So if you go to Asia, you'll see and look at you'll see little Asian looking Jesuses, and you'll see African Jesuses, and you'll see mestizo Jesuses, and you'll see white Jesuses, and you'll see Chinese and Siberian and Inuit. I mean, so one of the great things about the Catholic Church's understanding that God became human so that humans become God is that it's okay to depict Jesus as a human being of all cultures. And so there is a whole counter history of where the church has not just said this is the kind of the only image of Jesus. So again, I think it's a per case basis. I think a lot of churches in America that have roots from the European immigrants and then their generations later, we have tended, I think, to have a very 18th, 19th century view of Jesus, an image, that's pretty standard. And that's probably, I mean, it is very limited. And so I think it's kind of good to be challenged. Like there's beautiful artwork on black Jesuses. I mean, probably closer to, if you had to ask the historical question, which is closer, this Western European looking Jesus or this probably the African looking Jesus is closer to the true, if you had to guess, because he would have been a probably pretty swarthy, Middle Eastern kind of person. So I mean, we don't know though. I mean, because they, that skin color can vary from dark to light in that culture. So it's good though that we don't get locked into, well, this is how Jesus had to look, or if you're saying that Jesus looked like that, I can't believe in that Jesus. Well, that's just sad. God became human. Jesus could look like anything. Jesus could have had no legs. Jesus could have been a Down syndrome person. I mean, we know he wasn't because he was because of the conversations that he had in the gospel. My point, though, is we don't wed our faith to a specific cultural image of Jesus. No, we wed our faith to that Jesus was fully human, enculturated into the culture of his time, so that from there all humans might know a way to God and salvation. Not that they become Middle Eastern to become the way of salvation, but that they deepen their own humanity and open it up to the grace of God through Jesus. And then that can be done in an Asian way, in an American way, and in a Native way. It can be done in many, many different ways.
Okay, well, we are actually out of time now, so if you can close us with a prayer, Father.
Okay, so again, this cultural unrest, I think it's symptomatic of these months that we're in. So Lord, just there's a lot of stress out there. There's a lot of worry out there. There's a lot of ways in which we as a society, including a church, we can become more divided, especially with the elections coming up. May you give us just the grace, that grace I'm going to pray for is the grace of solidarity, the grace to be able to just pause and recognize that there is no divide, that if we have goodwill and we make some effort, there's no divide that we can't somehow cross and find a bridge to and a healing to, even if there's strong differences. Give us the grace to be those bridges. Give us the grace to seek those bridges. Give us the grace to do so in a way that can continue to point out the injustices, the true evils in society, but also do it in such a way that can help us protect the dignity of everybody and the common good of all. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Well, thank you, Father. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll continue the Q&As on Mondays at 6 o'clock. On Tuesdays, we have exposition with adoration and benediction at 8 p.m. The noon Mass on Wednesday is live streamed, and then Rosary on Thursday at 4 o'clock. And then tune into our normal Sunday schedule. Masses are Saturday at 4:30, Sunday at 8, 10, and 12, and then the 10 o'clock Mass is live streamed.
And remember, email christopher.gowell@stregis.org, any question or any topic on any subject
that interests you.
that interests you.
All right.
Thank you. God
Thank
bless.
you. God bless.